In this new world of talkers and pundits and live streamers all giving their opinion on political and social and cultural issues, there has been a new hierarchy of legitimacy assigned to those who happen to have the biggest followings and therefore the biggest voices. But oftentimes it is these very people that tend to get things wrong and in doing so mislead the masses down the path of false ideas. And Destiny, who I'm sure many of you know of. If you don't, you'll know about him today in this video, is a part of this phenomenon. And unfortunately, he's wrong on many things, but chief among them is the meaning of American patriotism and what the significance of the American conception of politics actually is. And in this video, we're going to explore why he's wrong. And we're going to go beyond Destiny, because this is not about Destiny per se. It's more so about the sentiment he is conveying. And we're going to actually investigate why the sentiment is wrong and use it to have some teaching moments as we, as Americans, continue to educate ourselves about our country and its virtues. But before we get into that, my friends, hello, hello, hello. I am Christian Watson. I am your host. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical lens, I must implore you, please like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, even if you disagree with me. We have to ensure that there is a smarter kind of politics and a more rigorous conversation happening, or else the forces that wish to destroy our country, our precious republic, I'm afraid may very well succeed. So, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can. Now, on to the video. So, the reason I'm picking Destiny here as an example is for a few reasons. Number one, it's less about Destiny himself and more so about the idea he conveys, as I mentioned before. Whenever you're dealing with an idea, it is charitable and is necessary to assign that idea an advocate, someone who represents the strongest or the best known version of that idea. Therefore, you're not constructing the idea for yourself, you are actually responding to an actual argument. Number two, part of it is because of his impact and his reach, and I think that can, if the wrong ideas are conveyed through people with wide, big platforms, that's not good whatsoever because it's plunging the masses into ignorance. And number three is because the idea being talked about here actually has great cultural significance to the current political moment we're facing in America, and I think it's going to become evident why that is so in a few moments. So Destiny made a tweet in response to Donald Trump's numerous indictments and convictions and legal troubles, which many of you watching this channel understand, many of those, or almost all of those, are trumped up, and many of those, or almost all of those, are based on wild legal theories that have no validity in the jurisdiction that they're in. Many of those, or all of those, have been overblown, but that's not what this video is about. That's a separate video. I've done videos about that before. But anyway, in the context of this tweet, he was talking about that. And so Destiny, in order to get a dig at Trump, wanted to say that Trump was un-American because our founding fathers, in the words of Destiny, actually fought against the kind of phenomenon Trump has supposedly become. Here's the tweet. Quote, anyone who is supporting Trump at this point has less in common with core American values than any immigrant they warned you about over the past 10 years. When 1776 happens, he goes on to say, it was to get away from exactly what Trump represents, someone who thinks they exist above the law. Now, there are just a few things I have to get stated clearly before I continue to explore this particular tweet, because there are some things in here that are actually quite interesting that I want to mention to you guys. First of all, 1776 represents the exact opposite of what Destiny claims in his tweet. The king and parliament were the supreme law in the colonies at that point. It was actually more so parliament, and I'll explain why in a second. They were seizing property, they were restricting free speech, they were engaging in overbearing taxation, and most egregiously, they were taxing people without the due representation for people to be able to have a say in those taxes. And they were also doing other immoral acts like quartering soldiers in people's houses against their will, thereby violating the sacred right of private property, so on and so forth. The founders knew that the rule of law only has force if it is based on a system of ethics that goes beyond the letter of the law. They saw themselves above the rule of unjust law and then fought to bring forth a system where justice could be practiced. A true rule of law was then built from the ashes of the system that was the colonial British-controlled system. A morally lawless system was abolished to bring forth a system based on natural law, which then set the standard for what justifies and legitimizes law, therefore giving you the ability to appeal to something higher than the mere arbitrary rule of Parliament or the king. Destiny's tweet, and people like him, it shows that he does not understand this basic distinction, and instead he has fallen prey to the mediocrities of the modern era. Now, I mentioned Parliament. One of the things that Destiny says here that is actually quite interesting is this idea of someone being above the law. Because I'm sure you have heard a pundit or a leftist commentator say, no one is above the law, therefore Trump should be charged. And again, I'm less interested in the application towards Trump and more interested in what that idea means more broadly. So this idea of no one being above the law is actually an idea that's fundamentally anti-American, because it presumes that the rule of law by itself is justified on its own merits, which goes to the problem I was talking about a few moments ago. But beyond this logical error, because obviously nothing can justify itself lest it be incoherent and contradictory, therefore it follows logically that the rule of law must be justified on something higher than itself. Otherwise, there's no good reason, no good argument to actually follow it. No, habit is not a good reason. People do things habitually that are bad for them and bad for society all the time. No, custom is not a good reason. Some customs are as useless as the paper they're printed on. No, simply being obedient is not a good reason, because blind obedience is a form of slavery, and that's not good for you, and that's not going to get you any closer to the truth. So none of those reasons are good reasons to follow the law, right? And none of those reasons are good reasons to obey rules that may be unjust. But beyond those logical errors, there's a deeper historical phenomenon going on here. So Clarion Minion, who was a professor at Notre Dame in the 1940s, actually wrote a study titled A Study of the Source of Our Legal Institutions, the Founding Fathers and Natural Law. And during the study, he goes into this idea of how parliamentary absolutism was a dominant principle that the Founding Fathers was actually fighting against during the Revolution. A lot of folks simply point out the grievances that I pointed out, the quartering, taxation without representation, but few folks actually understand the exact phenomenon that was going on at this time. And Mignon himself points out that after the Glorious Revolution of 1688, which was basically a civilizational changing point for England, where they went from a society of monarchical rule to a society largely of the primacy of Parliament, parliamentary absolutism, he mentions that after 1688, there was no fundamental law superior to Parliament. And Parliament, during the 1776 moment, actually considerably asserted their legitimacy and asserted their rule over the colonists. Mignon goes on to say, quote, by pushing and pursuing the principle of parliamentary absolutism, it was England and not America who abandoned the ancient traditions of English liberty. In 1776, he goes on to say, the British government was insisting that the law of the land and the immemorial rights of English subject were exclusively and precisely what the British Parliament, from time to time, declared them to be. Now, Mignon goes on to say that this claim for parliamentary absolutism was at variance with all the great traditions of the natural law and common law tradition as recorded through the centuries, from Bracton to Blackstone. By abandoning their ingrained concepts of the natural law, the colonists undoubtedly could have made a comfortable settlement of their tax and navigation difficulties with England, but they chose the alternative so well and so logically described in the Declaration of Independence. So what is he talking about here? He's talking about this idea that the rule of law in the conception of the British Parliament was this absolute code that you were bound to no matter what. Therefore, in the same way, no one could have been above the law because the law is the law is the law. But as I mentioned, if your idea of law is at odds with a system of sound ethics, if your idea of law is not justified by reason, if your idea of law has no universal backing, then your idea of law is simply based on lower activities and habits which justify nothing. This is why natural law is such an important document, not just for, I think, having a moral society, which is just plain spoken, but also for justifying the precepts that society's government decides to do and correcting them when those precepts happen to be immoral. Very simply. So when Destiny says no one is above the law and the founders fought to make sure that no one could be above the law, he's actually being historically illiterate because they literally fought the idea that the law was settled, it was stationary, and anyone who opposed it defied the will of all that was good. That was literally the entire calling card of the American founding. That was literally the entire philosophy of the pamphlets, of the letters, of the speeches made by so many people in the founding generation against the tyranny of Parliament. So actually, if you want to look at it in a certain way, the American Revolution is the exact affirmation of the kind of thing President Trump is going up against right now, because the American Revolution basically said it is okay to stand above and be above unjust laws. And by the way, you in the 21st century are also above unjust laws. Don't let anyone tell you differently. The law is not absolute. The law is contingent on its moral correctness, and wherever moral correctness and the law diverge, you happen to have the ability as an American citizen, as a human being, to stand above that gulf and to make right what is wrong. So if we're going to actually put it in the context of today, if we can establish that the prosecutions of Donald Trump are largely unjust and lawless, and especially in a moral sense, if not even in a particularly legal sense, then we can say yes, he and anyone else who's prosecuted under those laws are by definition above the law. To say otherwise in this context would be to affirm the notion of parliamentary absolutism, would be to affirm the notion that law itself is some kind of divine force that justifies itself, which is incoherent. And that, my friends, is anti-American. If Destiny cannot understand this, he can't understand American patriotism, because he doesn't understand American values, which is interesting because he invoked American values in his tweet. And yet, historically, American values are the exact opposite of what he is trying to say. Now, there's one thing I want to actually point out here. A lot of people like to simply go back to John Locke and say, well, John Locke said this, or this person said this. It's actually funny because John Locke actually probably agreed a little bit more with Destiny or other people, because John Locke was quoted as saying, quote, when any number of men have consented to make one community or government, they are thereby presently incorporated and make one body politic, wherein the majority have the right to conclude the rest. Locke is basically implying here, as Mignon says, that once government is installed, the consent of the individual, of the governed, of the rights of the individual are completely subject to whatever the government wants it to be. But Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and the founders profoundly disagree with that, and they view the government was, in the words of Adams, an attorney, in the word of Jefferson, simply a servant that would be there to protect the rights of the individual. In the moment that aim was gone against, government needed to be corrected or it needed to be abolished. Jefferson said the following: no man has a natural right to commit aggression on the equal rights of another, and this is all from which the laws ought to restrain him. When the laws have declared and enforced all of this, they have fulfilled their functions, and the idea is quite unfounded that on entering into society, we have given up any natural right. So those of you who would say, well, Christian, the social contract says that we have to be below certain laws. Well, in all honesty, even if you believe that, this was not the wisdom of the American founders. This is not the wisdom of their formulations. And by the way, beyond their wisdom, in general, that's a bad argument as well, because if the social contract theory means anything coherent, it must mean that we come together on the virtue of a mutual need for people, which the natural law theorists called sociability, which is our inherent internal social organ as a human being, and we combine together in society to protect against the wilds of the wilderness. It does not mean that you subordinate yourself to your fellow man, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau would say, and somehow give up the things that God put inside of you, or nature, or whatever you want to say, that are fundamentally inalienable. So even from that argument, destiny is wrong. Let me just close right here. Within the context of the American founding, within the notion of Americanism, the philosophy, and within the idea of American values, we are all above unjust laws. And any law that asserts itself as absolute, or any idea of the rule of law that asserts itself as absolute and unchanging and unwavering and demands total disobedience, that is incorrect. That is un-American, and that can be safely disobeyed in the process of restoring a proper rule of law, where justice is the intractable principle, and everything that flows from that conforms to it and is justified on the basis of a higher system of ethics. So I submit to you that destiny is incorrect. Those who are like him, who are saying that no one is above the law, are also incorrect. And if you believe that the law is absolute and that no one is above the law as well, I would submit that you're incorrect, and you should probably revise your thinking, at least if you claim to support American values, like Destiny claimed in his tweet. That is my message, my friends. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get this message out there. If you have some money and you want to help me out, you can donate to me as well, which is going to be all in the comment section down below. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.